Hello. If you've ever stepped off an elevator onto the wrong floor of an underground car park with lights that don't work and there may or may not be something moving in the far corner, then you've experienced just a fraction of the fear, confusion and unusual smells that confront explorers in the dangerous dungeons of the mortal realms and 41st millennium. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're exploring the unknowable history of Warhammer Quest games, Blackstone Fortress, Cursed City, and Lost Relics. In this video, we'll be traversing the history of Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress, Warhammer Quest Cursed City, and the intro game, Warhammer Quest Lost Relics. This is part 3 of my 3-part series on the complete history of Warhammer Quest. If you want to find out more about the original 1995 Warhammer Quest, check out part 1. And if you want to explore the deeply chaotic magical reboot Silver Tower and its sibling Shadows over Hammerhal, give part 2 a watch. In 2018, questing would take a grim leap forward as Games Workshop released Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. For perhaps the first time, the 41st millennium would know not only war, but exploration. As the first Warhammer Quest game set in the 40k universe, it would have to overcome some initial challenges. What does a dungeon look like in space? How do you get a band of extraterrestrials working with the Imperial xenophobes? How do you make dice feel futuristic? But the game would overcome these and then some. In fact, it was to deliver some of Warhammer Quest's greatest achievements. Set against the backdrop of an ancient and mysterious space station, the titular Blackstone Fortress, the game brought together scoundrels and scavengers with zealots and xenos by placing the action beyond the boundaries of Imperial space. Drawn together by the secrets that might lie at the centre of the fortress, the explorers meet up on a nearby station called Precipice and descend into the Blackstone's shifting corridors and chambers in search of archaeotech and themselves. If you, like me, are the kind of person who remembers the mid-90s Crystal Maze sci-fi rip-off Scavengers that broadcast on ITV, and why wouldn't you remember it, then you will know exactly what the Blackstone Fortress story is like. The Blackstone Fortress itself is an interesting setting for the game. In earlier lore, there were 6 of these impossibly ancient pre-Imperium space fortresses known to both the forces of man and the forces of chaos. Although they predated human history and couldn't be fully understood or controlled, they took on a major role in the 13th Black Crusade, when most were blown up, lost, or thrown at planets to assure mutual destruction. Warhammer Quest takes place on a newly discovered 7th Blackstone Fortress. Just as ancient, just as mysterious, though unlike its predecessors, this one is awake. Just as in Warhammer Quest Silver Tower, this dungeon is aware of the explorer's presence and it acts accordingly. As with the previous Quest game, Shadows over Hammerhal, GW game development doyen Jervis Johnson once again took on lead design duties, further evolving the Silver Tower rules engine with new refinements and changes. Whilst many of the core rules remained in place, this time around, the dice used for activations would be based on different shaped icons rather than numbered pips, and there would also be D8s and D12s alongside the D6s that are used to show higher levels of ability. There is also a D20 to represent the machinations of the fortress itself. This is an unheard of dice in a GW game. What on earth is this? A new mechanic would see Explorer and enemy activation order determined at the start of an encounter, with the potential to risk a gambit to improve your place in the initiative order. The board tiles feature hexagonal spaces and fit together like chunky jigsaw pieces. With all of the shooting going on, there are walled areas that provide cover and unusual angles of the board sections that make for interesting lines of sight. The nature of the fortress as a malleable, shifting arrangement of corridors and spaces is captured through the way that the missions take place. There is still a deck of cards powering your exploration of this dungeon, but it has taken the old Quest event and dungeon decks and merged them into one. As you turn over cards, you will face either an event or discover an entire map that is fully set up for the encounter ahead. A maglev has deposited you in an inhabited section of the fortress, and you need to get to the next maglev across the map in order to move on. Between you and it are a host of enemies, but your reward is archaeotech and clues to the location of hidden strongholds that contain even greater riches. As soon as you're through the map, you can either bug out, head back to Precipice and lick your wounds, or push your luck and turn over the next exploration card. After all, it could be more clues, or more enemies. In some of my earliest playthroughs of Blackstone Fortress, the idea of sticking around to face more enemies than we absolutely had to was completely unfathomable. We found it super tough. In one mission, our Janus Drake stepped out of a maglev and almost instantly got destroyed by a hail of lasgun fire. Chaos cultists vaporized him in one turn. Like any quest game, if the dice were against you, Blackstone Fortress could be brutal. Each explorer brings with them special weapons and abilities, and their own inspired condition. If you meet it, then you can flip your character card over and gain access to their stronger abilities. The explorers also have access to the facilities of the ship that transported them to the Blackstone. These special abilities can be powerful, but they can only be used once per expedition. Between missions, the explorers can visit locations on Precipice and use those same transport vessels to perform special actions, like gambling their archaeotech for the chance to win more. Precipice was the equivalent of the settlements you could visit between Warhammer Quest adventures back in 1995. Unlike other Quest games, this was the first game in the Quest series to include a secret envelope that could only be opened upon completion of the campaign. A great addition that raised the level of anticipation for the final vault and paid off the story as well. There are 8 playable explorers in the base game, ranging from Imperial representatives, roughly, to Xenos guides and fortune seekers. At the forefront is the rogue trader Janus Drake, a futuristic Imperial noble if ever I saw one. Drake is the first official Citadel miniature of a rogue trader since 1989. Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader saw the release of a Rogue Trader miniature with a power sword and bolt pistol that came out as part of the Forces of the Imperium set. There was also a 54mm Rogue Trader miniature released as part of the Inquisitor range in 2001, Duke Cleander von Castellan. But as they say in the Imperium, if it ain't 28mm, it ain't for real. In 2002, a book focused on the adventures of a rogue trader dealing with Eldar and the Eye of Terror was written by William King, and the rogue trader was named Janus Dark. That seems like an unusual coincidence to me, but who knows. Drake was joined by some other Imperial oddities, Thaddeus the Purifier and his acolyte Pius Vaughn. As a Ministorum zealot, Thaddeus seeks the secrets of the fortress to aid in his faith-fueled fury against the enemies of the Emperor. Pius Vaughn, meanwhile, is a former hired ganger turned dedicated servant of Thaddeus, service in the form of flames. In the December 2018 issue of White Dwarf, Thaddeus and Vaughn would get access to a unique artifact card if they could complete the enclosed prequel mission to the Blackstone, entitled Traitor's Fame. The Imperial navigator Espern Lacano also represents the return of a long-lost profession to the boards and battlefields of the 41st millennium. In the Rogue Traders Adventurers series, there were miniatures for an Imperial navigator, as well as a couple of astropaths. Lacano picks up the heritage of them all, with a distinctly Dune look. Like the Rogue Trader, the last time we saw a miniature for a 40k navigator was for the 54mm roleplay game Inquisitor, though there was a 30k Imperial Navigator released as a convention exclusive by Forge World for the Horus Heresy game around 2014. In the band of mercenaries and heroes, you will also find the Eldari Ranger, Amalyn Shadow Guide, the Kroot Hunter, Diet Grek, and the Rattling twins, Rhine and Rouse, who act in tandem, together taking the slot of just one explorer. These heroes bring their own histories and secrets. Finally, these explorers are joined by a being so rare and feared across the Imperium that it cannot reveal its true identity. UR-025 is one of the few living remnants of the legendary Men of Iron. Sentient robots that threatened the superiority of mankind in the Imperium and were wiped out during the cybernetic revolt millennia ago, and now these beings are all but gone. The armies of the Mechanicum have made sure that there are plenty of robots in 40k again, with the update of the Castellan robot miniatures from the original Rogue Trader, and UR-025 looks like he could just about line up with the other 1989 Imperial robots too. As the first man of iron ever seen in the game, and seeking a kindred spirit in the Blackstone itself, UR is probably the most intriguing and unique addition to the 40k universe that Blackstone Fortress has to offer. The enemies in the game are drawn from just as broad a range of history, forgotten lore, and new perils. Divided into the natural fauna of the fortress and other exploring interlopers, these enemies are equally dangerous. Living in the halls of the fortress are the unparalleled predators, the Urguls. First seen in the 5th edition Dark Eldar Codex as part of the Court of Archon, and previously available as a Finecast miniature, these new beasties would be the first time the Urguls made it to plastic. The fortress also defends itself through the weapons of the spindle drones. These small spider-like robots are native to the Blackstone and hadn't been encountered before, but they will be seen again. In a race to uncover the dark secrets of the Blackstone Fortress, it has also become infested with the Servants of Chaos. Traitor Guardsmen had long featured in the 40k universe, but Blackstone Fortress would be the first time we would see official plastic miniatures to represent them. They are joined by 2 Chaos Psykers, who, despite their incredible powers, are doing their best to stay grounded. There are also a number of Zealots from the Dark Mechanicum roving these shifting corridors, the Negavolt Cultists, featuring some scary electric appendages and a bad attitude. Another returning foe can be encountered during missions in the Blackstone. Beastmen have returned to the 41st millennium. In the era of Rogue Trader, Beastmen could be fielded as sanctioned abhumans in the ranks of the Imperial Guard. Spurned by the Imperium on the basis of their mutations and lower social rank, it's not hard to understand why many Beastmen would turn to Chaos. Though a slightly earlier Beastman reappearance does confirm that they've not all turned to the ruinous powers, as the marginally less chaotic Gore Halfhorn can be found claiming bounties in the hives of Necromunda. Finally, the big bad guys for the base game are the Chaos Space Marine Lord Obsidious Malex and his 2 Marine bodyguards. This is one of my favourite approaches to Chaos Space Marines. Rather than legion upon legion of anonymous Marines stomping around the galaxy, just a couple of rare, ancient warriors who have built up a retinue of beasts and betrayers in the millennia that they have existed. These guys really feel like storied characters who have just managed to survive since the Horus Heresy, and they're just going about their evil business with their little club of guys in an isolated pocket of the universe. The game would see 4 small box expansions over the next 2 years, each one introducing new side quests and enemies. First up was the dreaded Amble, which brought an old creature from the 40k universe back to life. Originating in the 80s when Games Workshop held a license to produce miniatures for D&D, the Umber Hulk was a massive burrowing creature with big old mandibles and a penchant for TPKing unprepared parties. As GW moved towards creating their own content, they wanted to make sure that players could use the miniatures they already had as much as possible, and also wanted to rebrand the ones that they had released. And so, in Rogue Trader, the Amble was introduced, a port of the Umber Hulk into the sci-fi setting. An updated Amble was released a few years later, but then these dangerous critters faded from view, like cockroaches hiding beneath the kitchen counter. An Amble turned up as an enemy in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay scenario Terror in the Darkness from December 1988's White Dwarf 108, the only time Games Workshop would put the fantasy-inspired creature into one of their own fantasy worlds. But last we saw of the Amble, it came as a picture of some dangerous Xenos species of the galaxy in 40k's 3rd edition. But when you shine a light into the darkness, you should expect some creepy stuff to scuttle out of it. And that's exactly what happens when the Blackstone explorers cast their servitor-mounted bulbs in the wrong corners of the fortress. The dreaded Amble is a dangerous mission indeed, and the addition of some of the Amble's boreworm brood makes it even creepier and more dangerous. Traitor Command was the second of the small box expansions released. In it, we get to encounter a Chaos Commissar. Although such individuals have been known to exist in the traitorous armies of Chaos, they are quite rare and had not received a miniature before this box. Typically known as Renegade Enforcers, this is the first time we've seen a Commissar in all his chaotic finery. He is joined by another rare traitor, a Chaos Ogryn. Previously mentioned in Forge World's Imperial Armor Volume 6, The Siege of Vrax, alongside Chaos Berserker and Plague Ogryns, this is the first time we've seen a Chaos Ogryn miniature hit the table. In Deadly Alliance, An ancient race with a complicated past would re-emerge on Precipice. The set included the first space Zote seen since 40k first edition. Called the Archivist, this potential Xenos ally could be convinced to support your expeditions in return for your assistance with a few problems of its own. Originating as a Brian Ansell idea for a Warhammer Fantasy species, the Zote briefly appeared in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition and made it into the Ravening Horde supplement for Warhammer 2nd edition and the Warhammer Armies book for 3rd edition, before a final appearance in 2011's Storm of Magic supplement for 8th edition Warhammer. The Fantasy Zote didn't have the stamina of its sci-fi cousin though. Back in the Rogue Trader days, the Zotes were described as a typical part of Tyranid forces, engineered by the Hive fleets like any other tendril of the Tyranid race. A champion of their species, Lorg, along with miniatures for a Space Zote officer, trooper and heavy weapons trooper in 1987. But in 1992, they were reworked and reintroduced to the setting. Now, they were slaves of the Tyranids, whose intelligence and telepathically communicative abilities made them great heralds for the Hive fleets. As Genestealer cults became more effective though, the need for Zotes diminished, and some individual Zotes sought escape from their captors before they were consumed for their biomass. In 40k 6th edition, a Zote can be seen alongside other Xenos menaces of the galaxy. There's even an Amble there. With Deadly Alliance, we get to meet and talk to a Zote for the first time in decades. And lastly, there was no respite. A now super rare small box expansion for the game that would see Papa Nurgle and his Plague Marines make a terrible mess of the place, with all kinds of typically gross tokens and powers. A trio of Plague Marines and 6 Poxwalkers were included in the box, repackaged miniatures that had previously been available as easy-to-build intro kits. Each of these expansions included new rules and missions, with a combination of new tokens, miniatures, new ships to visit on Precipice, and some even had small board sections. All of them included those secretive epistles that could only be opened after completing the respective side quests. Who knows what's inside? Well, I mean, I do, but I'm not going to spoil it. A couple of enemy packs were produced to let players increase the size of encounters, namely the Servants of the Abyss and Cultists of the Abyss boxed sets. A set of cards called Abominable Intellect allows you to use those minis to raise the difficulty level of the game. The name of this pack is a reference to the term used by the Adeptus Mechanicus to refer to AI. They call it Abominable Intelligence. 2 more packs were also released. Advanced Arsenal provided new weapons and equipment for the explorers, and Endless Peril expanded the range of encounters available in the game. And finally, there were the big box expansions. These advanced the story of the Blackstone Fortress and our explorers' endeavours to conquer it. Blackstone Fortress Escalation was released in 2019 and featured 4 new explorers, several new cultist enemies, new rules and new boards. The box also included a new retinue character, the Blackstone Fortress equivalent of the henchman we've seen in previous versions of Warhammer Quest. Retinue characters could be recruited to join your party. In this case, it is a servitor by the name of X-101. The new explorers included a new rogue trader, Naem Shai Murad, the 3rd rogue trader miniature in a couple of years after the release of Janus Drake, and the Kill Team rogue trader box, which included Elucia Vane. A Primaris Psyker by the name of Aradia Madellan, who is clearly inspired by the range of 2nd edition Imperial Psykers, sculpted by Jeff Goodwin. Just look at those amazing colours, man. Daedalossus, a Mechanicum techno-archaeologist, and Gottfried de Montbard, an Imperial Crusader Knight and last survivor of a doomed Ministorum Crusade fleet. The models for all 5 had previously been released in the self-contained bookshelf game Warhammer 40,000 Combat Arena, which was available exclusively in North America and Germany. That game reworked Silver Tower designer James Hewitt's gore-chosen rule set for gladiatorial combat. According to Warhammer Community, narratively, it pitted the explorers against each other in training combat, whilst they journeyed to the Blackstone Fortress to take part in the missions found in the escalation box. A fun bit of exposition that my compulsively headcanoned brain is happy to hear. The enemies of escalation take the form of new Chaos cultists with deadly new weaponry and the introduction of new mechanics that track progress and increase difficulty as you go. The second big expansion was Blackstone Fortress Ascension, released in 2020. This pack provided the finale for the campaign in the Blackstone Fortress itself, as more of its defense systems activate and giant spindle drone tripods make their presence felt. Although offering no new explorers, the box did include new cards, tokens, rules, and a couple of surprising missions, not to mention the final secrets it had in store as well. Between December 2018 and September 2020, White Dwarf would publish a range of Blackstone Fortress supporting material, covering everything from new heroes and retinue characters like a Jaquero weaponsmith, Harlequin Solitaire and Eversor Assassin, to new scenarios and new rules. Several of these articles were bundled into the 2019 Blackstone Fortress Annual, though sadly, that would be the only annual released. A real shame, as having the quality White Dwarf content packaged in this combined way is really helpful. The cover art for the Blackstone Fortress boxes was by Paul Dainton, and they take a different approach to his work for the Fantasy Quest games. Instead of the defiant heroes standing strong against impossible odds, we see the intrepid explorers more slowly stepping through the mist and murk of the arcane facility. There's a real sense of the oppressive and dangerous nature of the Blackstone Fortress. You can immediately tell that this dungeon fights back. In 2019, Games Workshop released Dark Millennium, a deck of 52 playing cards featuring the art of John Blanche. The cards featured many unusual characters from across the universe, but most notably for us, there were blanched versions of several Blackstone Fortress explorers, sublime interpretations of Janus Drake, Thaddeus the Purifier, Pius Vaughn, and Espen Lacano. Blackstone Fortress would see perhaps the strongest quest narrative, both in game and in supporting novels. A prequel, Blackstone Fortress by Darius Hinks, sets the stage for the game, explaining how several characters have found their way to the fortress. An anthology of short stories by various Black Library writers, Vaults of Obsidian, would explore more of the game's characters and lore, whilst a finale, again by Hinks, Blackstone Fortress Ascension, would tie into the final game expansion pack and wrap up the core narrative. Hinks also wrote a couple of audio dramas, as well as an additional short story that was only included in the limited edition hardback release for Ascension. Perhaps one of the coolest publications of GW lore in recent years would come in the form of a journal written in-universe by Blackstone Fortress protagonist Janus Drake. Continuing in the tradition of the earlier Liber Chaotica and the Xenology book, the Liber Xenologist includes a first-person perspective on some of the old and new foes that one might encounter on the edge of known space. As a Warhammer Quest game, Blackstone Fortress offers everything that you could want. Immersive story, captivating mystery, tight game mechanics, interesting enemies that you want to fight, exciting dramatis persona that you want to play. This all comes together in a perfect harmony in order to make this a tremendous addition to the series. And as the first game in the 40k universe, we get to play host to lost lore like Ambles, Zotes, Men of Iron, Beastmen, and all sorts of secrets that we haven't seen for decades. I think that this is a tremendous, incredible addition to just 40k in general, but as a quest game, it is a huge success. I have a unsurprising soft spot for sword and sorcery games, but I find that Blackstone Fortress is very close, if not at the very top of my personal rankings. It really jostles with Silver Tower. It's a toss-up, to be honest, because they're both so amazing. And Blackstone Fortress really proves that 40k can play host to this kind of dungeon diving game. So where do we go from here? The franchise just hit a satisfying all-time high. A sellout run and demand for new adventures in the dungeons of the Warhammer world is at fever pitch. With all the lessons learned from designing and releasing dungeon divers from 30 years of Quest games, surely everything is set for the best game in the series ever. Right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? As much shrouded in controversy as in vampiric mists, in 2021, Games Workshop would release Warhammer Quest: Cursed City. In Cursed City, a band of vampire slayers face down the undead court ruling over the city of Ulfenkarn. Absolutely dripping in the blood-red theme of vampires, witch hunters, and undead ghoulies, the gothic setting of Cursed City is magnificently captured in the game's art, lore, and overall presentation. With a damned city setting and the presence of witch hunters and zealots, there's even a certain superficially Mordheimian vibe to the game as well. It's not hard to see why expectations were set so high. Cursed City sold like Realmstone on release, but it was then plagued with issues that almost immediately tainted its reputation. Likely impacted by the global pandemic and subsequent printing and shipping issues, the sold-out game didn't receive a reprint for almost a year. Perhaps the bigger issue, though, was the complete lack of communication from Games Workshop about the status of the game. There was no real news about Cursed City for quite some time. No word on whether a reprint was coming, or if this was just a limited release. And despite the game's scenario book mentioning future journeys, there was nothing forthcoming from GW about when or if we could expect expansions. There were a few articles in White Dwarf following the initial release, but they could at best be described as designers' commentaries with little added value beyond advertising the now unavailable game. Unlike for every previous Warhammer Quest title, there were no rules, scenario, enemy, or character support available officially by Games Workshop. Understandably, this caused frustration in some communities, and the game's initial excitement and warm reception quickly turned as cold as a vampire's heart at midnight. A tie-in novel by C.L. Werner entitled Cursed City was released alongside the game, and it included an exclusive character card for a morally ambiguous necromancer. Much like the game itself, the novel would reveal itself to be a little on the repetitive side, and the amazing backdrop wasn't really explored to the fullest. There was a cool and pretty unique pre-order bonus for Cursed City though. You could get a neat metal key to the city of Ulfenkarn, something to reward heroes who were able to win the city its freedom. Whilst the components and miniatures in the Cursed City box are some of the very best ever seen in a Warhammer Quest game, the pacing is some of the not best. The core systems from Silver Tower that had been refined through Shadows over Hammerhal and Blackstone Fortress are still present and effective, but the scenarios, or journeys as they are called here, enemy mechanics and structure of the game are a little bit out of whack. Simple missions could run for hours at a time, and worse, in order to progress through the plot, you could sometimes find yourself repeating them again and again. For me, the biggest problem with the game is that whilst enemy numbers are high, enemy interaction is low. Because of the structure of some of the missions, it's possible to find yourself having to fight the same enemies again and again, and they just don't have very strong behavioural tables. Some of them just don't do very much. An interesting new mechanic for Cursed City would see random crises occur that would draw a hero away from the action to deal with before they were returned to the board the following turn. There is some great variety in these crises, and they add a real pep to the game. It's almost like a different take on the adventure booklet from Silver Tower. The heroes of the game include a noble, a witch hunter, a necromancer, an elf ranger, an ogre, a priestess, a cogsmith, and a knight. These are all named characters and are perfectly interesting for the game, but they don't appear to have the gaming heritage that we saw with some of the Blackstone Fortress explorers or earlier Silver Tower denizens, at least as far as I could tell. Whilst the enemies take the shape of skeletons, zombies, bats, rats, and undead ogres. There's an absolute cavalcade of vampires in the box too, and a range of named characters that would be target for your decapitation journeys. The enemies represent the basic troop choices and several other options and characters for the Soulblight Gravelords army in Age of Sigmar. It's not clear what exactly caused the delays and lack of communication about Cursed City, but it seems like the need to release the Gravelords army at a time when printing and shipping card expansions might be difficult meant that the miniatures came out as intended and the quest of it all got lost in the mix. Thankfully, like the other Warhammer Quest games, there has been a vibrant fan community for Cursed City that has attempted to streamline gameplay and surface the true strengths of its setting and core rules. In particular, the work of Peter Cooper has given the game a real vampire's kiss, breathing new life into the sturdy bones of the game, whilst shaving off the things that held it back from being a classic, as well as introducing new enemies and more compelling, interesting journeys and outcome effects. Despite the miniature releases getting ahead of the rest of the game, Cursed City wasn't done from an official standpoint though. Games Workshop released a first box expansion, Night Wars, in late 2022 that allows for new scenarios to hunt down stronger and more dangerous vampires that have arrived in Ulfenkarn following the defeat of Radakar the Wolf. This expansion unfortunately had some controversy of its own, precisely because of all the enemy miniatures needed to play the game, needing to be bought separately. The box only includes the scenarios, rules, cards and tokens, with a big insert in order to make those small tokens feel like they should sit inside such a big box. At the time of writing, a recent announcement of a second and final expansion was also greeted with mixed emotions. Nemesis is designed to complete the story, and like Night Wars, it features only components and no miniatures. I'm excited to play through both Night Wars and Nemesis, but that excitement is tempered as nothing really changes in terms of the city or the power of its vampiric overlords between the heroes arriving and finishing up. Radakar the Beast still stalks the Cursed City's streets. Perhaps a metaphor for the unkillable nature of a vampire, but whereas Silver Tower and Blackstone Fortress in particular were able to neatly dovetail the adventurers contained in the box with a lore that adds to the wider universe, Cursed City doesn't quite succeed in the same way. Despite my reservations about how Cursed City plays and my despair at how Games Workshop have supported it in its run, I have still really enjoyed playing it. Yes, it can be a bit of a drag at times, but it still has a lot of the great hallmarks of Quest that make it an incredibly fun game to play with friends. I have no doubt that it's going to have a long afterlife on my gaming shelf, and I really hope that this is not the end of the proper Quest line from Games Workshop. This is definitely a bump in the road, but it's going to be easy to recover based on all of the tremendous games they have in their history. And so, in September 2022, the latest addition to the Quest family arrived on shelves, Warhammer Quest Lost Relics. For reasons known only to the Chaos Gods and the GW marketing department, this small box intro game was released exclusively via Barnes & Noble in the US and in only a couple of other countries worldwide. In it, a band of Stormcast are trapped in the labyrinth of an evil magister. Using a simplified rule set, for instance, heroes have just 3 wounds instead of 4, and combat is determined not by rolling dice, but by spending your dice results, the game is intended to provide a taster of the Warhammer Quest experience for new players. The game uses miniatures from the Warhammer Underworld's Harrowdeep starter set, the full warband of Zandir's Truthseekers, along with Regis Fullbringer, a Knight Incantor, previously only available from the Getting Started with Warhammer Age of Sigmar guide. But these are the only minis in the box, with the enemies taking the form of cardboard tokens, most of which replicate other warbands from the Underworld's game. In an unusual move for Warhammer Quest, albeit one that makes sense for a starter game, the dungeon tiles are composed of multiple rooms connected together. There are 4 double-sided big boards, each with several rooms on. In a way, it's almost like that original Hero Quest board way back in 1989. What doesn't make a lot of sense though, is why the art for these rooms is so diverse in colour and content that it produces an uncomfortable effect. Perhaps it's just the evil of the Magister's maze at work. Lost Relics is simple and fun. It touches on the hallmarks of Warhammer Quest, but doesn't outstay its welcome. It's not the weightiest addition to the series, but as a fun diversion and introduction, it offers a few pithy treats. As long as I've been a gamer, there has been Warhammer Quest. Even when it went out of print, fans made sure that the lantern stayed lit, and that new adventures could be had in the dark corners of the Warhammer world. When the reboot was announced in Silver Tower, I rejoiced. When it was expanded with Shadows over Hammerhal, I adapted. When it leapt into the 41st millennium, I cheered. And when it hit the blood-soaked streets of Ulfenkarn, I cried. But through it all, I never stopped playing. Whatever its form, whatever its rules, and whichever hero you play, Warhammer Quest has remained one of the finest dungeon board games ever made. And most importantly, the stories that it's helped us all tell have been unforgettable. I have really enjoyed telling the story of Warhammer Quest over the last couple of videos. I hope you've enjoyed it too. If you could leave me a comment below and let me know anything that you liked, anything that I missed, and if there's something you'd like me to tackle in the future, I would really appreciate it. If you did enjoy my content, then go and check my channel. You'll see a couple of other videos I've already put out there as well. And until next time, thank you so much for watching. I am Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. The game takes its... No one's supposed to know!